So, welcome to Watercolors with Shirley Spencer. So, since my first trial run teaching a lesson about sequoias at sunset, I got a lot of feedback, really good feedback of really different things to do that would be helpful for people, which is fantastic. So, one of the suggestions from one of my artist friends was to actually show initially what we want to come close to producing in this lesson that is going to be California Poppies. So that spring is coming on. I thought this would be a really appropriate composition for today, and a native flower to California. So this is going to be the California Poppy lesson. So this painting right here I did for one of my lessons a while back. And I think the composition is kind of fun. You drape kind of some of the flowers off the edge. You have a seed pod. We could even put in a bud if we wanted to, because like Audubon, it's really fun when you paint flowers like Audubon did with birds. He painted an egg, a chick, a mom, and a dad. It's really fun in botany to paint not only a bud that's going to open, but a flower that's in full bloom, and then also the pollinized seed pod afterwards. Kind of shows you the three stages of the flower's progression. So in this case, I think I don't have a bud on this one here, but we could put one in onto our painting today. And unlike this painting, I would really like today to show you how to make some different types of skies. So this sky here is done with, you do a wet on wet wash, which we did in the first lesson behind the sequoias, which you now know how to do. And this wet on wet wash, to get this really interesting texture, I basically use a sponge, or you can also bunch up a paper towel and have all that texture and get kind of the same texture to it. But a sponge, you can, any sponge will do. Anything that has like big holes and a lot of texture to it, and you basically blot off some of the pigment, knowing that you're gonna have to make the sky darker than you intend it to be, because some of it will be removed eventually. So this sky is one option if you like that look. This is a traditional wet on wet wash sky, and today we're going to try to do that wet on wet wash with some salt, because we talked about that on the first lesson, but I want to show you how to do that. So the Mediterranean whatever kind of large chunk sea salt, and then table salt, either one is okay. It's going to have a different look, so we're going to try the large grind today. And what that is going to do is the pigments actually, in a wet on wet wash, when you have all your pigments on there, again, remember to put more pigment than you intend, because what happens is the pigment congeals and is drawn to the sodium chloride crystals. And then at the very end, when your wet on wet wash is dry, then you can brush off the crystals and you'll end up with this really incredible textured sky that is salt is a really fun thing to do. So we're going to try that on our sky today. But this is something like what we want to end up with. So again, a composition that is in kind of thirds, 2/3 of the base of like the meadow, and these kind of orange dots in the back, and on this one too. You can see to indicate that there's fields of poppies, not just the ones you're seeing close up. Like you're laying in the grass and looking through these big ones you're seeing right in front of your face, and then more in the background. So we're gonna start with the sky. We're gonna go, while the sky is drying, after the salt and everything, we'll be working on some of these poppies that are away from that wet area to allow that to dry. And then we'll go back in and work with the flower and the seed pod there. And then the foliage, the green background then goes in, and then the foliage goes in last because it's more opaque and darker, and you can put it over the top of the lighter green. So this is what we're going to work on today. So get your paper out, get your paintbrushes out, and we're going to start like any good watercolor drawing, painting, with a drawing. Now, one of the things I don't think I mentioned the other day when we did our painting of the sequoias was that because your paper is almost like a cotton ball, it's very absorbent, and if you use a lot of lotion on your hands or anything like that, when I do work on a big project for commercial or something like that for somebody, I actually wash my hand all on this side with soap and water and all the way down, because if it's a big piece, the oils in your skin can actually get onto the paper and absorb into the paper, and then when you put pigments on, they will actually kind of bead up and not absorb like what you'd like. So that could be a problem. So you really want to make sure that your hand, if you're doing some really, important project, that you keep your hand really clean from your body oils. So irregularity is really important in a natural landscape or a painting like we're doing today, because nature is not, in a lot of cases, has a lot of abnormality and irregularity to the edges of the petals, the landscape in the back. So what I'd like to do is we're going to just start out here with a drawing. And again, one thing I learned that came out of the lesson last time was that the pencil drawing that I did was actually too faint, and people couldn't see it after I watched the lesson, and I apologize for that, but learning curve. And I'm just the kind of person that I like to do kind of hard things. So we're going to make, like in this one, we're going to make that petal turn back, which is a really fun thing to try to make that really look like that. And it's done by your pigment and the colors and the intensity to turn that petal backwards. So California poppies are just ubiquitous this time of year, really pretty in California. And they are really orange, so we get to use a lot of colors in our palette today, which is really fun. And that's why I found this one works really well as a composition. So there's my first poppy. That's really all I need as far as a drawing. And again, you can stop this video at any time. But California poppies are what makes the scientific name is Eschscholzia californica, and it's in the poppy family. Bleeding hearts are also in that same family. One of the things about California poppies that makes them absolutely the California poppy is that little pedestal underneath the flower. If you don't have that little pedestal, then it is a different type of poppy. So there's lots of different types of poppies, but we're doing the classic California one today. So this flower here is done, and we're going to try to make maybe that petal kind of fold back, which will be fun to try to give. And we want to make a kind of a swooping, beautiful stem there where we're going to kind of know where it is. And then we're going to make our big one below the horizon line so we can work on it while the sky is drying. And this is going to be a full one open looking into it. So California poppies have 4 petals, and the edges are a little bit ruffly. We want to make those edges ruffly. And then this is a full open poppy that has bloomed out. And interesting that once a poppy gets pollinized by an insect, the petals fall off almost immediately. So to actually see poppies in bloom, those are all the ones that are waiting to get pollinized, which is really fun to think about. They're so silky and satiny, which is really beautiful. And they're almost, when the sun comes out, if any of you have gone poppy gazing, you know that poppies have this incredible, almost neon, I would say, look on a big field in the full sun, which is really beautiful to see. And of course that color and these big open wide petals are an attractant to insects fluttering in the breeze. So pretty. I think I'm going to make this one a little bit bigger to match. We don't want to make it insignificant, just a tad bigger. And because the orange is so transparent, you're going to have to make your drawing a little bit less pronounced. Unlike our other lesson with the trees where we were working with darker pigments, these orange colors are and yellow are more transparent. So you're going to be able to see that drawing through a little bit better. And also the pale green instead of dark greens. So we want to make our drawing not too dark, otherwise it will show through. And the amazing thing about inner part of a poppy when it's wide open is that the reproductive structure looks a little bit like a green little vase or like an urn. And then the stamens are actually black, which are really cool. We'll do those. So that's all I need for that flower right there. So I'll lift that up a little bit. That was one. And so 4 petals, and they come and taper into the center. Then this one over here, we're gonna, and we can bring that stem down. And this one over here is going to be in the corner, and part of it is going to go off the page, which Georgia O'Keeffe, probably most famous woman artist in the United States, maybe other than Grandma Moses and Mary Cassatt, of course, very famous American women artists as well. But Georgia O'Keeffe would paint in watercolors, and she would drop her big, huge petals of these irises and things that she was painting. She was famous for that. Kind of off the side of the page, and when I was younger and looking at her work, I was always like, oh, shouldn't you put everything on so you could see it? And of course, I think some people want to see everything in its entirety, but there's some curiosity that can come from not seeing everything, which is kind of fun too. So 4 petals again. So this one is going to be, this bottom one is kind of a tricky petal in that it comes out towards you, and we might get that impression or not. You know, it might work and it might not. And then of course we need to have a stem off there. Otherwise it looks like it's floating in space, and that's not what we want. So this petal here, this flower here, is kind of an abnormal one. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 petals. This one's going to be their fun one, to try to make that look roughly and like it's coming a little bit out at you, and the same with this one. This one has a little bit of that pedestal for a California poppy, showing a little bit of that pedestal down in here. This one, because you're looking right into the center, we can assume, or we can draw it in, we can assume that the stem somewhere is behind this petal. Or we can just pull it in here with artistic liberty and do that. Now, just to put in, we don't even have to put the foliage in really right now, because we can fill some spaces that look a little bit empty with some of the foliage later. And as far as putting our bud in, we want to put our bud in too. So let's make a really graceful line coming up like this, and coming all the way over above the skyline, just to show, this beautiful bud with kind of the round base of a traditional. Once it gets the poppy gets pollinized, it turns into this elongated seed pod that is green, and once it gets brown and develops entirely, you can pop it open, and inside just pops out all these really black poppy seed that kind of almost looking like the ones we eat, flies out of it. That's not to say that you can eat California poppy seeds. Please note that. don't want you to say, Shirley Spencer told us that we could eat poppy seeds from California poppy. No, wrong answer. So there is my drawing. I can add the foliage in later. So just to kind of give you a look here. Can add the foliage in at the very end, just tips of it somewhere where it will look and kind of complete this whole scene. Okay, so what we're going to do first is we're going to work on that sky. And this is really going to be fun because we haven't tried this yet in a lesson. And so we're going to make all of our blues right now wet and ready to go. Because once you get a wet on wet sky going, you want to be able to work quickly. And I got a little water on here, that's fine. So we're going to try to avoid, obviously, this poppy that goes in here, this seed pod as well. And we're going to do the salt. So we want a pretty big brush, but a brush that you have some control over, not like gigantic. This is only a small, kind of a smallish piece of watercolor paper. Sometimes I work really big, and I have to get up actually on my drafting table with a ladder to get some of the pieces that I work on. So I've been on, I was off Facebook for about a year, but with everything that's going on, try to bring some happiness and beauty into the world. I started putting one of my big paintings on Facebook per day for 30 days. And I think we're on painting 9 today. And one of the things on there that you can see is how different you can create skies, all different kinds of textures and clouds, or dreamy skies, dreamy sunsets, dreamy clouds. So, and in some of the paintings that I'll put up, one of them is coming up in a couple days, will be the mountain lady slipper. And in that painting, because botanicals lend themselves to either a white background or maybe a salted background, something where you can kind of accent your botanical. My mountain lady slipper I actually did with rock salt. So I'm gonna put that one up in a couple days, so you'll be able to see what the salt can do, and hopefully today we'll get a good look at that as well. Now the thing with this is a wet on wet wash, so we're making everything on the paper that we want to be sky wet with clean water. And this is a really nice brush because look at how fine of a tip that comes to. So I can really get in here and it doesn't have to be absolutely perfect. We're just having fun here and doing something relaxing and creative. So if you want to speed up and pass some of these sections, if you get bored, you can do that, or you can stop and start anytime you want. Okay, so I've got my entire sky wet. So odd numbers are always, and irregular, like in thirds, is always more interested than halves. So you can see that we've kind of done our sky as 1/3 of the composition. We have 3 major flowers. We're gonna have a seed pod, and we're gonna have some foliage to kind of balance that out to make it really interesting to the eye. So now I like to use a lot of different colors of blues in my skies, not just one. And sometimes I even use purple, or not usually green, because if I'm putting it against a landscape, I want the green to show up from the landscape. But to keep the viewer's eye into your painting better, you need to try, not always, try to make your corners just a little bit darker than the rest of your painting, because it will keep the viewer's eye interested inside the painting instead of like flying outside. So as in any wet on wet, and I'm just gonna, this is like some of my favorite parts because again, we're gonna put the pigment on right? And then we're going to actually lift it up and move it around. So right now I'm actually holding the bottom of my paper up a little bit because I have a little bit of an angle to my drafting table. And I am going to make this darker than normal because we're going to be using the salt, which will diminish some of the intensity as it dries. And then we brush off the salt crystals because the salt crystals will absorb. Ooh, look how pretty a lot of that is doing. Maybe I don't want to do a salted sky. Because when you get a really neat looking sky, sometimes it's hard to want to change it much. Now, typically when you look at a landscape, if you've ever noticed this, is as you go with your eye down and look toward the horizon line is always paler blue than what you see either above your head or higher up in the sky. So to give that impression, we want to leave the lightest and palest part of our sky at the horizon, which is actually reality. That's how it works. Now we've got like 3 different shades of blue on there. We've got some cobalt, we've got some ultramarine, and so I'm going to just let this kind of move around the page a little bit to make it not so separated. Oh, I kind of almost like my sky just like that. But we're going to try some salt just so that you can see what that technique looks like. And the interesting part about the salt is, oh, I didn't get close enough on the seed pod here. So I'll just bring that back in to make it nice and close and tight. Looks like I had some yellow or something in this brush. It wasn't totally clean. It's okay. The blue will overpower it. And so we want to make this darker than we intend. And that almost looks just like a really cool sky right there. And the thing about the salt, you don't exactly know how this is going to turn out. And I think I mentioned this on the other just briefly, but with the salt, if you have it too wet, it's not going to work very well. It will actually, the salt will kind of melt into the water and not really have that effect you want. If you don't have enough water, it won't, and it's too dry, it won't work either. So I call it the Goldilocks zone. you have to have, and you just don't know exactly if it's, exact right wetness or not. But we don't want it to dry too much because I'm kind of moving this around. Have a little piece of pigment there. But I really almost like that sky just like it is, but we're going to try some of this salt. So the rock salt is going to give us bigger pieces. So I thought I would, of like explosions of color when it dries, which I thought would be more fun to use so you could see it better, the outcome. And so what we do is we're just basically going to grind some salt, or you can shake salt or whatever kind you have onto here. And keep moving this a little bit because we're having some pooling down here at the bottom of my page. So I'm just shifting this back and forth to kind of get that water to run back up to the top. And if at the bottom I get too much water, I can always just pull it off with a dry paper towel, or I can also use a dry paintbrush. Okay, so here we go. So this is something, yeah, you can get a little messy with it, but you can already see that the pigment is drawing itself too. And when I say you got to be kind of liberal with this. Like, don't be shy. Okay, maybe add some more on the corners or whatever. But you can also already see that the salt is drawing in these pigments, and the sky is going to end up lighter than what we originally saw. Okay, so I've got some excess salt up there. We will take care of that later. Okay, so I'm done with my sky for now. Now, sometimes with the table salt, the crystals are small enough that people even leave the salt on once it's dry. And it looks like stars, or it looks like a really, really cool texture. And it actually is sparkly. So if you want your sky to look sparkly, you can leave your salt on. But over time, moving your piece around and showing friends and things like that, the salt might kind of brush off. It's okay. It's okay. So I think that I got some pieces of salt left in here. I want to go push back into the sky and get all of that, the excess off of there. Okay. So while that is drying, now one of the disadvantages of doing the salt is it takes longer to dry, which is, you know, neither here nor there. But while it's just, you have to be a little bit more patient. Work on another area of your painting while it's drying. So what we're going to do is we've got two major poppies down here, big ones, that we're going to work on while that sky is drying up. Now, because this is a really critical part, because the poppies are so transparent and they're so pale, yellowish orange, we're going to need to get clean water, because I have some blue in my water right now. And if I were to put orange in blue, they are fantastic complementary colors across the color wheel. But if you put blue and orange together as two pigments, because they are across the color wheel and complementary colors, you will get brown, which is not what we want for our poppies, our translucent, ethereal poppies. No way. So what we want here is we want absolutely clean water and as clean pigments as we can get. Now now the blues can go away. On my palette here, actually this morning, I put some fresh yellow here because, like I said, some of my yellows have green in them on my palette and things like that, and sometimes it's a little messy. So to do these poppies, I put in a big dollop of clean, totally clean yellow to work in these to make sure that I get that translucent look of what I'm looking for. So get all your water nice and clean, get a little bit in your bowl, wet up the ones you want to work with, and you might want to put in a little bit of these over here, red or orange colors. So we've got most everything ready to go. Now this is going to be a wet on dry, and we're going to start now. Things that work for me is I find that since I'm right-handed, if I work on this poppy first and then try to reach over and start doing this one, my hand can smear all of this if it's not completely dry. And even if it is dry, your pigments can actually catch on your hand and smear across your paper. So I always try to work from my upper left corner in my painting down to my lower right. It just works for me. You don't have to do it that way. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start with this lower left poppy first. And to get the petals to look like they're going into the center, the edges of the poppy, of each petal, I'm going to do individually. And each petal is going to be palest yellow orange on the outside. And as you come into the center, to give give your eye kind of that sense of you're looking into a vase, or inside of this beautiful flower coming out at you, to make the colors get deeper and deeper and richer is going to give you that sense of looking into something. It's going to get more shadowy, darker, and more vivid as you go to the center. And on the outside and periphery, it's going to be lighter colored. So, and we can always go back again. Watercolors are like this. You can always go darker, but you can't go lighter. So like in this one, as an example, I went later with a smaller brush and actually made more of the detail around the edges to define them, and did, the stamens and stuff last. But we're gonna go pretty light because we can always go darker with some of these yellow. And I work one petal at a time. I don't know. And this is wet on dry, so we're gonna kind of put in some of this beautiful yellow here. And then we can also add later, we don't have to do that now, we can add some orange or a little bit of red to make that orange. And there's all different kinds of red, cadmium, there's magentas, there's alizarin crimson, there's all different shades. If nothing else, they have beautiful names. Where all these pigments come from, it's pretty cool. So back in the day when, you know, and I don't ever remember actually having an original tube of this, but when you look up old watercolors, there was a color originally called Mummy Brown. And when I was a kid and I was painting, I always thought that is such a weird, kind of freaked me out actually, that, you know, what, are mummies this color? You know, when I was younger. And actually not nowadays, and not in any time recent history either. They actually used to take mummies of, yeah, dead people, mummies, and grind them up and use them in watercolor paper, pigments, excuse me. It's like, seriously? So yeah, kind of a weird history. But I do remember as a kid when I was painting, that the Mummy Brown was a name that they were still utilizing as far as a pigment, but they were not, it wasn't really mummies at that point. Oh my, what a crazy history of some of these pigments. Okay, so that petal to me, other than some detail that I'll put in later, looks really nice. Like, I'm gonna leave it just like that. Because like I've said before, sometimes you start working and you wish you'd stopped earlier. Like, oh, it looked better. Now, again, people say, okay, isn't this a little bit wet right next to it? And yes, it is. But if I can work really careful, it dries pretty fast. And I can just kind of work next to it and be careful, because I don't want them to kind of melt into each other. I want to keep them separate, because really to distinguish between these petals, you're going to need to differentiate them. It's all going to be about where lighter orange is coming together with darker orange is going to determine which petal which petal is which. And because this back petal here that I'm working on right now is the one behind, it's going to be pretty dark in there. So I'm having like a red cadmium here. I'm just putting, and I'm going to make this edge really dramatic to make that look like it's casting a little bit of a shadow, actually, inside here. We're going to keep our stigma there in the center free, because we'll be putting green on that later. And a little bit of kind of an alizarin crimson in there. And that's a pretty, you want to use that sparingly. And not that watercolors are completely unforgivable. Like, if this was too dark and I was like, oh, I made a mistake, I didn't really want it that dark, you could always go in with a clean brush and look at that, it's already drying. Clean brush and pull some of that pigment out of there. See, that's a little bit too dark on that edge for me. Want to put some more yellow back in there. Yeah. So okay, so that back petal, to indicate that it's in the back, we're making it kind of dark there and bringing some of that around the top side to make kind of a shadow of this petal. Okay, don't want to mess with it too much. I still got a little bit over here to work on. Bringing this edge around. And it's already dried, so I can pull some more water in there. Okay. Okay. So sometimes I notice just taking a little bit of pigment and kind of, while it's still a little damp on these ruffly edges, to kind of show them off. Okay, so that back petal is good. I like it for right now. I can always come, like I said, we're going to come back in and put some detail on these. This petal here, coming out to face you, is a little bit challenging because of the fact that to give it that sense that it's laying down and pointing toward you is a little bit tough, but let's try it. The way that I usually pull that off is to try to, the poppy petals, each of them have a texture and an orientation. So an orientation coming toward you. So you can actually kind of use your brush to indicate that orientation. So that's all we need for that one. And then I might go down to a smaller brush just to get that edge, because this is a kind of a thin petal and I don't want to, and I just want to put just a hint. This one's kind of small, but there's going to be ruffles to it. And if it's not perfect on your drawing, you go a little bit beyond, that's fine. And we want to make it look like it's coming out at you. And the center in there, kind of coming down dark at the bottom. And that this one is sitting down. To make things appear like they sit down, you need a shadow underneath. And this edge, kind of roughly and pretty. Okay, so gonna accentuate that line again now that this is drying up a little bit. Okay, so on this last petal, this one's fun because it's kind of angled, and we're gonna make this one paler than kind of everything around it. So I'm kind of working in an area that potentially could be wet, so I'm gonna try to be really careful here. And it's ruffly and going back down into the center. So we want to keep this one kind of pale on this side, and then maybe accentuate. Ah, there we go. And so once that all dries, we're going to take a thin brush, a thin round. So let's just say this one right here, pretty thin. We don't need to get too fussy. So this one right here, kind of draw it out on our paper. And we're going to maybe mix some of this yellow with some of this red, like a alizarin crimson that we have in here. And we want to put less water with it to make it a little bit more opaque, because this is going to be a little bit of the detail. Kind of mix it up there in the basin. And this brush might be too big, but we're just having fun here. Sometimes I get real crazy with it and use a magnifying glass. Okay, and still kind of just going on the edges too. And we can actually, because that green that we put in as the meadow is going to probably butt up against some of this and obliterate some of this little detail we're doing here, but we can always come back in and do that again if we want to. Okay, and then on this ruffly one, well, let's do this one too. It's first, it's a little drier, so And to give that impression that it's coming out at you, let's bring some of those lines out like that, like they're spreading out toward you. And then this one here, I might actually use a little bit even thinner brush, which one of my favorites, this one right here. And we're going to put just a little bit of pigment on there. And this one here is going to be pretty critical to just look like it's this ruffly edge. Poppies are so beautiful that way. They look almost like crepe paper. And we have lots of different poppies in California. So to give that look, and behind it, we want to make sure it's darker. Otherwise it's not going to really show up here. And maybe some yellow in there with my little skinny brush to get in there, in between all those ruffles. Oh, there we go. You know, creating art is so fun because you, with your hands, you can like experiment with all these beautiful pigments, and there. So, yeah, I think this is kind of where I want it to be. And some of these edges you can accentuate with some almost red, alizarin crimson, whatever you have. So we'll come back at the very end and do the center of the flower with the stigma and everything in there. Okay, so let's go over here and we're gonna work on the even bigger one next. And like I said, you can stop this and go on if you don't want to, but I'm gonna complete the whole painting, so if you want to stick with me. So this one here is going to be our biggest flower out of all the poppies, and we start with a paler yellow on the outside. I don't know if I can do that. It probably won't matter. There's a little pencil line in there. Green will probably cover it up. So really, watercolors are not a mysterious thing. You just need to get in there and get your brushes out and start playing with it, seeing what you can create. I think some people, well, there are some people who think that watercolors are a beginning spot to start as an artist. And people that I know that do watercolors say it's actually probably the opposite, that watercolors are definitely more affordable, which is really nice. Pigments are less expensive, but the issue is that once you, with oils and acrylic, which are really awesome mediums as well, you could scrape them off, or you can start over or paint over the top. And in watercolors, you pretty much, if you make a huge mistake, you have to pretty much ball it up and throw it away, which to me is, they're a really fun medium, but and it's not like rocket science. You just have to experiment around and learn some of the techniques that will give you the freedom to, you know, experiment with them more and be comfortable. Because when people say, oh, you should get serious with your art career and start painting oils, because they're like so much harder. And I was like, what? Really? So to me, but there's tricks though. That's what's so fun. You can really learn these little tricks with the salt or brushes or wetness and dry and things like that to make your watercolor look like you want. Okay, so as I come to the center of that one petal, I'm going to add some darker colors into the center to give it that sense of depth, like you're looking into an urn or a vase. And this one down here is already drying. Okay, so I need to add some more water. So if you want it to be more fluid, just add more water. If you want it to stop, just make it dry. So there is control in this. It's just you have to know how to do that. Sometimes I have people ask me, because I've illustrated 3 books, they say, how many takes did it take you to get those paintings done on some of my botanicals are really exact, and how long. And when I think back on that process, it's yeah, I don't even know how to explain this, but I every single one of those paintings was a first take. Like, I didn't have to go back and do them again. And some of them had mistakes in them. I just went back in and really quickly and repaired them enough that nobody knows the difference. So, okay, so not that those are completely done, but we're getting started here. And then I'm going to try to get these in here. And I start with yellow. Now, Windsor yellow is a really, really nice yellow. And the reason why the Windsor yellow is super nice is because of the transparency of it. The cadmium yellow is a little bit heavier. And like I said before in my other lesson, I have a multi-level, very sophisticated, I'm just joking, hummus container that I use as my water. Because it's multi-level, I can use the top as a cleaner pool of water and the dirtier water on the bottom. These are just things that work for me really well. So very, very rarely do I throw a painting away. I try to work with it until I can maybe salvage it. And most of the time that I'm able to do that. Okay, such beautiful colors too. So there's complementary colors on the, and I'm probably being redundant and everybody knows all about this, but in case, it's a good reminder. When you look at different pigments in watercolors or painting, the sum of all these colors would make blackish brown. And weird, it's so weird in physics, it's the opposite. The culmination, or the combination of all colors is white, which is really crazy. But when you actually have physical pigments like this, if you put all these colors together, you would end up with a very unattractive blackish brown. But there's certain colors on that color wheel that look really good together. And orange is across the color wheel from blue and purplish, right? So that's why lupins and poppies look so good together. So if you ever wanted to do a painting with, maybe we'll do that sometime, with lupins and throw a couple poppies in there, that would be spectacular. Because you're getting, of course, that's what our sky is doing for these poppies. It looks really neat because they're complementary colors here, orange and the bluish. And then that's why Christmas colors are red and green look so nice together, is because of that complementary color idea. Okay, getting some really neat looks on these. Again, darker going toward the center to give that sense of you're looking into a chalice. And the ruffly edges accentuate some of those cracks that go in by pulling some of that pigment in around the edge, like that. Wow, so cool. See that? I like that right there. I'm not gonna do anything with that. I like when they kind of almost look like veins or bleeding down. It's really fun. So we want to accentuate these edges. Now, one of the parts about, you could come back and do this detail on these, and maybe I'll, rue the day that I did this, but the point is when we put the green on, there's going to be a tendency, if we're not really careful, for some of this really beautiful orange detail to kind of mush into the green. But the point is, while it's wet like this is the opportunity to be able to do this kind of look and not have it be so stark. Because if you do this on a dry surface, it's going to have a different appearance. So while these petals are wet, I really need to do this. It's a trade-off in trying to figure out if I can go back into here later and with the green and not mush it up too much. Now, to make these petals look like they're different, I'm going to have to choose two that are behind or a little bit deeper. And so in this one, like this painting I did, I chose these two opposite petals to pull in even darker color into the center to make them look like they're a little bit behind. So why don't we do that on this as well? It's still a little bit damp for sure, but we can pull this in to make it look. Oh, yep, a little bit too much right there for me. This, need to make that a little fainter, something. No right and wrong. We're just having fun here. So, and don't let anyone tell you you're not artistic, because really putting pigment on paper is a wonderful thing to be able to do, and you don't have to be professional or whatever. And whatever is professional anyway. Just enjoy yourself. Do things that are beautiful and pretty and bring you joy. Stop worrying about what other people say. Oh, so to me, we're getting some really cool look here. Okay. And we can always come back and put, more detail. But again, sometimes I try to stop myself so I don't go crazy with the detail and get too involved in that. Okay, so like I said, we're going to come back and do the centers of these later for sure. Now, let's see how our salted sky is looking up here. We've got some wet areas still, which is good, which is okay. It takes longer than a regular wet on wet sky for sure. So this is going to be the tricky part, is to try to work on that line with the green without disturbing what's going on up there. Because especially right there, I'm seeing I have a little pool and right there of wet, but we're going to go for it. So again, look at my water. Okay, if I put green with that, what color am I going to get? Something fairly unattractive. So we need to I just dry it out with my paper towel really well and get it nice and clean, because we're going to go into some really pale green right now. And that pale green needs to be nice and clean. So Are we having fun yet? So, and we're gonna not do this flower right now because there's just too much going on with the sky right, well, yeah, next to it. Let's see. Actually, well, I already cleaned my water out. We'll do the green background right now. So the thing with the green, kind of, you know, the flower field or wildflower field, whatever you want to think of it, we're gonna make kind of, and this is the part where you can quotes kind of cheat a little bit, because of the fact that we've got a stem in here and we've got this stem for sure on here. We can actually divide this up into portions, which is going to help us work with it better and not get out of control. So when I have stems and things like that, I will actually partition pieces and work pieces at a time, and that really helps control your ability to add color to it as you go, and to do a wet on wet wash and have it be successful without drying over here by the time you get over here. So I use stems and topography and things like that to partition and portion up, so I'm only working on one part at a time, and the next one and the next one, instead of trying to do this whole, because it's very complicated at this point, right? To be able to do a wet on wet wash behind these flowers now at this point is going to be really difficult. So that way with this stem, I only have to work this section, and then I can work that section, and then I can work this piece just around there, and this can be separate. And so that makes it easier for me. So we've got some water now in here, and we're going to go into some of our greens. And this one yellow that has been completely destroyed by green, but it makes them really cool. Sometimes I leave those. And we want to give the impression that, and this is really tricky, because if you put orange on green, it pretty much turns brown. So we're going to put the green on, starting with like a yellow and going to a little bit darker, you know, darker yellowish green, and then pop in a couple little pieces of darker green. But on top of that, before it dries, we've got to, but not too wet, because if it gets too wet, it will just melt in, and then the whole thing will be brown, which is not what we want. We're going to actually just at the end, just as it's drying, pop in some light orange that'll make the appearance that there's poppies all throughout the field. So this is kind of a fun part for sure. Okay, so I got a little piece of water on that poppy right there, and I don't want it there. There we go. Just to save it from blurring around. So why don't we, with a fairly large brush, let's see, which one do we want here? To put that water on, to get it going. Again, I'm starting kind of left and going right because of the oils on my hand. And we're going to just try to work around this poppy. We're going to come back to this poppy. Ooh, I have got some blue in here, which is okay because we're doing green. And green is yellow and blue together. So, but I'm just going to work around this poppy as best as I can, because I'm going to come back for that one. And I'm going to use my stem here as a barrier. And I'm not going to go really tight up to that sky, because I don't want the salt to come down and get into this. And this is going to be the tricky part. To get this all wet and going and close into these petals that I just spent a lot of time, right? So, and this flower should be pretty dry at this point. And if not, you can have and it starts to kind of melt into each other, you can just grab your paper towel and blot it dry. And if you don't get it absolutely perfect, that's okay, because you can kind of, once you get the pigment on here, you can pick up a brush and kind of push it into the areas that you didn't want to get too close to. Okay, so this section, this wet on wet wash, is almost ready to go. And because my stems are going to be darker, I can paint right over that and come back to it later. Okay, so here we go. We got this section ready to go. And hopefully your flower is dry and nothing will bleed into it. So we're going to start with a little bit of yellow, right? And we just want this to be really abstract, not too fussy. You've got a lot going on here that's really beautiful, and you don't want to take the attention away from what you're really trying to do here, which is the poppies. So this is going to be really, really impressionistic. And I have different shades of green here. We don't want to go too dark because this is spring, right? We want to make it very alive, lively, and bright. Okay. And the darker green of the stems is going to be darker than whatever you've got going on here, so don't worry about that. So I once read one of the old Spanish journals of the galleons as they were traveling up the coast of California. And one of the really, really cool things about that journal I read was that they knew they were in California as they were sailing up from Baja. They knew they were in California when they were looking out on the coastal areas of California from their ships and seeing the California poppies. It's like, wow. Can't imagine, from a galleon looking on and seeing like the hills around Santa Barbara and stuff like that back in that time period. Must have been incredible, incredibly beautiful in spring. Spring is happening regardless. Okay, so there's irregularity. There's I'm not trying to blend this, in other words, to make it all the exact same color. And while it's wet here, I'm going to just kind of pop in a little bit of texture and trying to make this corner down here a little bit darker than everything else so that your eye stays in to the paper. Okay, now while it's kind of wet like this, but not too wet, and to pull the water that's pooling kind of down here at the bottom, I can actually dry my brush out and pull some of that off and out of this corner that's kind of being problematic a little bit. While it's like that, kind of spring green like that, I want to take, and this is a good reason to have a multi-leveled hummus water container. While it's like that, I want to actually be able to pop in some kind of yellows and oranges and things like that to make it look like there's poppies out there growing a long ways away in fields of them, like clumps of them. And if you mix this much, it's going to look like your poppies turn brown. So just putting a little bit in here before it turns brown. And we just want to look like there's fields of poppies. Give that impression. Okay. Without mixing it, otherwise that orange and red will mix with that brown and mix with the green and turn brown, which we definitely don't want. Okay, so that section right there is done. Now this corner down here is dark green. I want to keep it that way, but it is a pool, so it's going to need a little drawing there. So the next section that we can work on, because it's a little bit smaller in size, is this middle section. So I'm just going to go in here and do this piece. You know, sometimes when I paint, I get into this zone. It's so wonderful to create something with your hands. Very relaxing, and it's really good, I think, for that analytical side of your brain. Helps you get into a beautiful space. Okay, so see, I've partitioned that one up, so we can go back in and start with the yellow again, and then some light green, and then dark green. Like I said, one of my yellows I kind of just sacrifice with green that gets in it. And then I also have a yellow on that palette up there that's sacrificed with a bunch of orange and stuff on it. So, because I feel like I just lose so much pigment if I just clean my palettes endlessly. And I don't want to be wasteful. So we just want to put a little green. And to make it move a little bit more, you could just add some water. And we want it to stay a little bit irregular. Don't want it to be all blended. Ooh, I'm getting a big pool down here. So I can just move that down in between those two stems and use that. Okay. Got some spa music on for you today. Okay. Okay, so that, now we want to put in just ooh, and I like what's going on right there. See, it's kind of just filtering down with these long, like seeping. Oh, I love that. Okay, so just a little bit, we want to give that impression of some poppies in the distance. A little bit drier. And this is kind of risky because you could risk turning it brown, which you don't want. So just put a little bit, you know, and make it kind of irregular. Okay, I think that's probably all I need up there. I want to make that a little bit more indistinct. So I just put a little bit more water on there. So really the background here is not the focal point. And that's really important. So we want it in kind of impressionistic, not what's really drawing your eye. So we have one more kind of piece here, which is going to be around the big poppy. And just kind of picking out some places that I needed a little bit more. Make sure I got those in. Okay, so over here, this is going to be the biggest expanse, but almost the most detailed. And because this is so translucent, there's an old pencil mark there that when I was working that one, I saw, and then I didn't really want to actually use the eraser until it was dry. So now this is the biggest expanse that we're going to try to work here. But the thing is, it's how can I say this? And it makes it even harder because there's so many petals I'm going to have to work in here before this dries. So this is when you're trying to work fast. I'm not using my biggest brush because there's too much detail in here. There's a lot of things I have to work around. And because the paper is cotton rag, it's going to be absorbing all this stuff pretty quickly. So, and my water is a little bit yellowish, and that's okay. And sometimes when I'm working close up to something like this, actually having if it doesn't matter, if the water is okay, the color, you know, the faint tint it is, it can actually show me where I still need to go in and work on. If I have a little bit of hue in there of something to give my eye something to work on. Okay, so this edge down here is done, ready for the pigment. This edge up here, so pretty. I don't want to mess it up too bad. sometimes I find, I mean, this is kind of a tricky botanical in that you're working with a background, that botanicals are much more easier if you have a white background, which is actually traditional for a lot of botanicals. But this, we're trying to give the impression of a field of flowers. So now I actually can go down and do that piece different at a different time. So let's use what we've got here and put in some yellow and green and do that really quickly before this all dries. And kind of leaving some open spaces and letting it kind of flow down. Kind of want to match what's across the stem from it as much as we can. And then got a hair. Oh well. And then some green on top of that. And then kind of working some green in between these petals because it's a nice contrast. And we want to make that corner darker to keep the eye inside the painting. Okay, we want to go all the way up to that edge. Oops, brush falling off. Okay, and all the way tight to that stem. And we can even use a little bit of that green and greenish yellow to come down in here as well. Some of my pigments sometimes are a little clumpy. They sit out for a while or whatever, and they dry and make kind of crystallize. Because once you put them in water again, they're going to be fine. That's the wonderful thing about watercolors, is you don't waste hardly anything, because the pigments can dry out, and then you can put water on them and they come magically alive again. So sometimes I do have some palettes that you can buy, which I would call more of like a student palette, that you can buy set up for you, which is absolutely great when you're learning watercolors and things like that. They're a little bit less expensive, and they offer a really nice variety of colors. If you get more serious about it, you might want to actually pick your own colors and set up your own palette like this, which is going down and buying tubes of watercolor and then placing them out on your palette. And you actually let them dry on purpose before you use them. But in the case of this yellow, I put it in and then I'm using it today, so it's fine either way. Okay, so on top of that, we're going to need to, just real quick here, before it starts to dry, we want to make this corner kind of dark. We're going to want to pop in some, kind of orange and yellow. And hopefully it doesn't turn brown too much. We want that impression of flowers in the distance, and kind of match up with this maybe a little bit, this side of the stem. Okay, might want to put a little bit down in here just to get a little feel in there. Okay, so I think, other than, some of this stuff that's pooling here that I want to pull out, this is, I like it. Okay, might want to make that corner a little bit darker, just because. Okay, so there we are. Now, hopefully, when I look at my water again, so you have to be, when you're working with a lot of different, my water again is kind of a yellowish green. So I'm gonna just dry it again with this kind of damp, wet paper towel. And I think this upper left poppy is probably ready to go with the salt around it. I don't know. And yeah, it feels like it. So I'm going to move some of that salt away. And it is, ooh, there's a little bit of blue on my finger there. Okay, so what we want here, first of all, I'm going to try to get rid of that blue because we want this yellow to be really nice and transparent. And we want to clean all that blue out of our brush or green or whatever we had going on there because the poppies is our focal point and we want to make sure they just really show off. Okay. So I think our next step is to try, without getting this blue involved, to do, we've got clean water. So we're going to start over here with this last poppy. Again, kind of starting out with yellow. This is a wet on dry wash. So, and we're going to go all the way up there and hope that that blue does not bleed into here. That it's stable enough and dry enough at this point. Okay. So I'm just kind of pulling a little bit of this color, those crinkly crepe paper like edges. And not to get too fussy about it. Now this back petal, actually I'd like to try to make it turn a corner. So, but also tricky that we've got this shadow to differentiate it from this petal that's in front. It's casting a shadow, so we're going to put it really dark, but we got to get this light in order to turn this corner. So that's going to be really interesting to do. So definitely starting out with a little yellow and kind of keeping this dry, a little bit dry, so we have more control over it. And we want to put the kind of the yellow on first as a base because we can always work darker. And then got some cadmium red over here. And we're going to try to see if it's ready to put that really hard edge in there. And then to turn this corner, you need a dark, like it's turning that corner. Now, going back to this petal, we'll come back and do some more detail in there, but, ooh. Okay, so let's, this is how my yellow gets messy, yes. So we're gonna start with yellow, a little orange in it, which is fine. And we're gonna try to make this piece look like it kind of folds back. The petal folds back. So many different little pieces in here, which is fun. So I actually took these three poppies off of a painting I did of California poppies, and used that as an example. Now, because I had a little bit of orange in my water there, I'm going to actually just go with wet water and pull some of that out because I want this to seem really pale and kind of velvety with yellow, not so much of that orange yet. I'm going to build on top of that. And then going around kind of the edge to give it that crepe papery look. Okay. And then this backward kind of fold, we want to really accentuate. Keep that a little dry. Okay, and then so we got this wow, okay. So there's, I think part of the beauty of watercolors is there's kind of a little bit of unknown to it. Now I'm going to go to a smaller brush and just put in some edges here. Okay. You know, and watercolors are so, maybe it fits my personality. I really like the immediacy of it, the transparency, the intensity, all those things. You know, some artists find different mediums that kind of suit who they are as people, which is really fun to think of it that way. Okay, we want to really darken that out because this petal here is actually casting a shadow on this one here, and this fold back. We need to put a little bit darker around on that fold to really make that, like, it might be too much. And if it's too much, just get into your water basin and pull some of that out if it's too intense for you. But I wanted to do that little fold because I think it's cool. And this one too, which is really fun. Okay, so you can get a lot of three-dimensional look with, it's all about shadows and light, where the light hits and where it's casting shadows. It's all about that. So in photography or in art, creating that sense of three-dimensional and how you do that in depth and looking into it and things like that. You get that by how you use your lights and darks. And we really want this to pop. So now down here at the very base, I still have a little wetness, so it's a blurring a little bit, but it's not bad. Okay. That one's almost exactly where I want it. Don't want to do anything more to really make it less. Okay. So we've got our poppies done. Now the background is done, so we can now, and it's dry, so feel it. And we're gonna probably have to change water again. But while we have this kind of orangey yellow water, I'm gonna go into my really skinny brush, which is this one. And they actually have, this is called a liner brush, and it's a 3. So it's really small, and it's called a liner brush. So I'm gonna just go in here with kind of this cadmium and mix it with a little bit of yellow, and that might not even be dark enough. I might end up going back in and adding some more, maybe some even alizarin crimson or something. But I want, this is just for accents. And oops, so there I like lightened my corner up, whether I liked it or not. So we want to kind of bring in some of these darker edges. And we don't want to outline the entire thing because that would kind of be boring and not natural, but we want to accentuate. Don't have to do the whole thing in an outline because that would look pretty unnatural. So we're just going in here and pulling in some of these edges with a liner brush. Okay, and some of these crinkly edges, really fun to kind of accentuate because they're so beautiful. And this one is kind of dropped off the edge, which when you put this in a frame, this bottom edge probably won't even show unless you, unless you want to, you know, frame it into more of a floating frame or something, then you would actually see the edges. Okay. And then just a little bit back on this one. Well, it's nice and dry now. And want to cover up if there is any green or anything showing that this edge can cover. We can do that. Or pale like water paper showing. We don't really want the paper to be showing. So just some nice fine detail there, just to kind of show it off. And then this one we just finished, so I don't know if this is dry enough to handle this, but it looks like it. Okay, now, oops, got a little bit of a piece of orange out there in the green. Okay, so we've got some stems to do and some foliage and the centers, and that's all green. So I think at this point we can actually clean up our water, not maybe for the final time, but we want to go back to green again. So we want to clean this up. And that's why I find a spray bottle works well, because I don't go overboard and go crazy with it, and then ended up having a lot of water to clean off. Now this, the stems are going to need we're going to do green here, kind of a darker green, so that it goes over the top of what we've got there. And if not, we can darken it up, but let's try with, you can always go darker again in watercolors, but you can't go lighter. So let's start with this level of green, and we can always go darker, or this might be sufficient. Now, California poppies have a little pedestal on them right below the petals, which is really great. And that, if you really want to be really accurate, I don't know if I can pull this off. Well, this is wet, or that's when you want it. So let's try it. If you look really, really closely, and a lot of nature is like this, to look real close at things gives you a completely different perspective. Around that pedestal is a small bit of orange. One of the things, and I might need to turn this because I'm right-handed and I do better with a nice straight line when it's this way. I have found that in a lot of cases, whatever the foliage is, or the stems or anything in flowers, sometimes that color of the petals is then replicated in the foliage. I mean, obviously it doesn't always happen, but when I kind of figured that out, it's really interesting to kind of look at botanicals and see that in some cases, whatever the petals are colored, there is sometimes a reminiscent hint of that in the stems or the foliage, which is really, really interesting to me. Okay. I find that by turning my page, I get a better stem. And that's probably dark enough for me. At least it shows. And that's really what we're looking for. That it's a contrast to what it's going across. And even if the stems of California poppies don't bend this way, we're taking artistic license just to be graceful. So remember that your painting is an impression of what you're seeing. If you want a photograph, go take a photograph. So, and I can do that too, you know, get really, really detailed and things like that in my paintings, depending on what is needed or wanted for that particular composition. But typically, if I get that detailed, I need my magnifying glass out. And we're not doing that today, so. So angle your paper. You can move it around a little bit. Angle your paper so that it's more comfortable for you. As far, and so this bud up here is, the seed pod. Oh, we forgot to put a bud in. Oh well. This seed pod is elongated and green, and all the black poppy seed looking seeds are in it at this point. When it looks like this, it's on the pedestal of the stem, and it's bright green. But because the blue sky is kind of taken away from a little bit from that, we're going to go back in with a little bit darker green to make some details and make that just kind of pop out. And make some, like below that pedestal, there's a little bit of a shadow, right? Which is, that makes that look like there's depth to it now. Okay. And then the center, while we've got green on the brush, I always try to think ahead and figure out what else I'm going to need that color for. The center of the poppies that are open, that center stigma is green. So we need to make sure while we have this green around, we can do that same thing. Okay. And coming across that blue sky, we might need a little bit of darker green to show it off, just to accentuate that coming down here behind the other stem. Okay, a little bit of a shadow there to make that pedestal. And where the petals are, we can go a little bit darker under that too, to make it look like a bowl. The same thing with this up here. Still a little bit wet, so. And we've got our stem down here that's in the shade. Now, while we have that green color on our brush, let's make this little urn-shaped stigma here. And there's still a little bit of paper showing there. That's okay, because we've got some black stamens to put in there still. And while we got green on here, I kind of, with my elbow, kind of the heel of my hand, lightened this up a little bit. So I'm going to go back in here and just put that back in to darken that corner a little bit, make it interesting. Okay, now, ooh, we forgot a stem right there before we get rid of our green. Let's put that in. And all it has to do is be a little bit darker than what's behind it. And because there's petals above it, it's going to be like there's going to be a shadow there, hiding this upper part of the stem. So we want to make that look like it's coming out from the bottom and has a little bit of a shadow to it. Yeah, there we go. Same thing with this one. There's a bunch of petals above it, so that green is going to be darker. And I wonder if this is dry enough now to kind of handle a little bit more of that, making it look like a bowl shaped. And there's ridges, like ribs, on this seed pod. So if you want to get really fussy, you can put those ridges in. Okay, we're looking good. And then we got to get, and again, black is a color that I use really, really sparingly because I find it's so unforgiving in watercolors. You can't really take it off very easy. But the stamens in a California poppy are black. So it doesn't matter how dirty your water is because the black will overwhelm it anyway. So we're going in with this liner brush again, super fine. And this is going to be a wet on dry. We want to contain this. We want to make sure this is dry before we do this because you do not want black bleeding all over the place. And we're just going to put some irregular, looking like they kind of come out at you, stamens in and around the stigma. To really, so next time you're on your belly looking at looking at California poppies really close, you can look back in there and see these beautiful black stamens, which is really cool. So just kind of, and I'm not going to put very many, that's fine. And so my brush is really dirty now with this really deep black. So we still, on the top of those stamens, are kind of these, the tip of there's the filament, the anther. So we're going to put those in, and they're kind of a orangish yellow color. So it's going to be a little bit tough to actually make that show. But we're going to make really opaque kind of look to it to make them. And we're just going to go in with a kind of a thick brush and pop some of these in here. It's not going to show that much, but it'll be a little added bonus. Kind of fun. Don't even have to do this if you don't want to. This part probably nobody would notice. And it looks like to me that we need to go back in there and do a little bit more on that green stigma. So I still have my multi-leveled water here going. The bottom is really dark with that black, but well, we have this upper section of my water jar here ready. Make some green and just put in maybe the last little details of this kind of stigma. There we go. And I think that's enough. Like, don't get too worked up about that. Okay, so now our last thing to do is and my water's black, so we need to get rid of that. And this is only if you want, because some people say, hey, I really wish I would have left it just like that, because to me that looks pretty nice. But even if you just put in one frond of the foliage, just even a tip, and when I look at this composition, I'm thinking that maybe just a little piece down in here, just to show what it looks like botanically. And the foliage of a California poppy actually looks like a feather. It's really, really pretty. And so what we're going to do is I have kind of a green here that doesn't have, I think it's mostly water. And I'm going to kind of make up my own green here. With a little bit of blue, maybe too dark. And then using some of my yellow green over here. Maybe that's too thin, and maybe I'll just move some of that over here. Avoiding my orange yellow. I want to keep a little bit clean, maybe for the next painting. Okay, that might be dark enough, maybe. It's kind of, you know, the interesting thing about California poppy foliage, it's kind of almost a aqua green if you've ever looked at it really close. And on the tips, if you want to get really, you know, worked up about it and really perfect, some of the foliage, not all, but some of the foliage of a California poppy actually has a little bit of pinkish to it on the tip, which is really interesting. So I kind of like that color there. It looks pretty accurate for the foliage. We might even want to darken our stems down a little bit, but let's do this now. So I'm just going to put, because I really don't see any other place to put it. You know, I like everything else. So we're just going to put kind of a, well, would it look better this way or this way? And it looks like a feather and kind of like a little a crow's foot or something. And I haven't even drawn this in, so we're just going to go this way to follow kind of the one stem. And just going to make it up. Don't even have a drawing for this. This is fine. So what it is there's little branchlets that come out that are in threes, kind of. And you have to work back, and then the branches get bigger. So I sit and look at foliage a lot, so I kind of know how this looks. So it's in like little threes. And as you get down further, then those branch off and start making little sets of 3. So poppy foliage is very beautiful because of that feathery look. And they just get bigger as they go down. So you would get, and then they're opposite. But really, again, not many people are going to be really looking at your foliage. They're mostly going to be looking at the poppies. So if this doesn't, you know, turn out exactly perfect, or don't worry too much about that. We're just having fun here. So one thing when I do botanicals, and obviously if it's going to be published or something like that, you're going to have to make every single stamen and every single petal and everything exactly correct, because it's going into a botanical guide, which is what you would expect. But if you're just doing something at home, you can do whatever you'd like, whatever you find beautiful. So a couple more of these and we'll be done. So when you sign, oh, by the way, we're going to show you how to take this off the watercolor block, which is what we've been working on today, to get it off the pad. And I love working on watercolor blocks because it actually gives you a better smoothness to the paper, I guess. Okay, we kind of want to maybe do one more branch or something down in here. Okay, Now, if you really wanted to kind of give a sense of roundness to these stems, you could go back in while you have this darker green and put one side of your stem a little bit darker to give it a sense of roundness to it. Depth, roundness. And you can just work right through that frond of foliage. You can do that over here as well to give a sense of, okay, we're looking pretty good here. Now here's the thing about the salt. Now some people actually like to just leave the salt on there. This is what it looks like, and obviously it's not going to stay like that, because you move it around, you show your friends or whatever, and pieces of it are going to fall off. Or we're going to do this so you can see what, because now you've seen it this way. And we're going to see what this looks like when you rub it all off. And this is kind of the aha moment where you get to see what your sky is going to look like. It's dry now, and you can see that the salt crystals are blue. So they attract and absorb that pigment. When you do salt on a sky that's, say, a night sky, you can just leave the salt on to give the sense of sparkly stars, which is really fun. Or you can rub it off so it won't get all over everything when you're moving your piece of artwork around. And even then, you don't have to get it all off. It'll come off on its own at a later date. So look at all that blue salt. So it does absorb some of the pigment. So what you need to do when you're doing a salted background is you need to go darker than you think you would. And then it'll probably end up about where you want it. So when I look at that, it's really neat texture. Look at that. So after the salt comes off, there's a few pieces left. It's okay. And hopefully your thumb is nice and clean. Otherwise you're putting your body oils onto that paper. And now that I look at this, you can always go back in and fuss a little bit more, but it looks like that green bled into that blue sky a little bit. And with a clean brush, I don't know if this is going to work if you don't want that green in there, but with a clean brush and some water on it, you can hopefully lift some of that green out that kind of bled into your sky. With a dry paper towel and just blot it off. And if you want, well, you've got that paper a little bit damp, and we're kind of messing with the pretty salt crystals there too, so we don't want to mess with it too much. You can actually go back in and put a little bit blue in there, back in, just to kind of bring that down and make it not so obvious. There you go. Happy with that. So, always sign and date your piece of work. And in this case, I will probably, as far as availability of places where there's places you could sign, I would just go down here in the lower right. And I always sign with a black pen, because I find that if I try to sign with actually a paintbrush, I don't get the level of detail I want, and my signature is pretty much unrecognizable. So I sign and date it with far enough away from the edge that if you put a frame around this, you'll still have your signature on there. So I want to show you, I have it over here, a little mat that if you were to put this in a mat, and again, this one's kind of small for this, but you can see how it would look in a mat. I need a bigger mat for this one, but anyway, it kind of gives you a sense of what a finished piece could look like. Let's just cut my signature off there and just go this direction. There you go. That looks pretty nice right there. So to kind of give you a sense of what a finished piece could look like. And like I said, you could get different sized mats. The one we did the other day was this one. If you remember this one that we did, kind of once I took it off the block, this one would be really pretty. Of course, this mat is too small for this size of paper, but you can see how the mat really accentuates it and kind of finishes it off, which is really nice. So getting our last step, getting the piece of paper off the watercolor block. And usually on watercolor block, it's usually on the top, but sometimes I find it on all different edges. So there's, once you wet your paper, this will kind of buckle up a little bit and make it easier to find. And with a butter knife, you just, this is when your paper is most fragile, so be delicate and easy with it around the corners, especially to kind of saw it off so that you don't actually right and cut through your paper, which your masterpiece then would be compromised. So, and you have the clean paper underneath. So that is California Poppies, Spring of 2020, Watercolors with Shirley Spencer. So here's our sample, and here's our the one we did today. So here's our sample. Here's the one we did today. And you can see that every time I do this, it's a little bit different, but lovely and fun to try. It's a nice composition. You get to use a lot of different colors. If you enjoyed this lesson, thank you for joining me. And if you have a piece that you ended up coming out with that turned out really, really well that you want to share, it would be great. Put it on the YouTube, and so everybody can enjoy your piece of art. So thank you so much. This has been wonderful during this kind of in-house sequestration period of our lives to be able, it's been really, really nice for me to share with you as well. So thank you so much, and join me again. Maybe next time we'll do another lesson and we can paint Half Dome or El Capitan or something. So enjoy Watercolors with Shirley Spencer. Thank you.